Hi everybody, Elliott here from Venture Content. I'm in the beautiful woods of Oregon, and today I'm going to be giving you some tips when it comes to using gimbals out in the wild, particularly the Ronin S, but these tips will extend to any sort of gimbal in general. So there are three questions you should ask yourself first before you even start using a gimbal. The first question applies to all of film technology. Before you start using it, you should ask yourself, why am I using this piece of technology? Always number one, because if you don't, you're gonna save money and time, and those things are both super valuable to you and your career. There's tons of different reasons to use a gimbal, but think about it. There's also, tripods out there. There are drones. You could just use a drone if you wanted. There's dolly carts, there's dolly tracks, there's gliders, handheld. Yeah, you can hold your camera handheld, so why don't you do that? And this is actually true because sometimes I've gone out and used a gimbal on projects that you come back and you're like, okay, it looks a little too weird because it's just a little bit too smooth and I wish I had just gone around with my hands, which I'm a big advocate for. I love using my hands. As long as you have a pretty heavy body, you don't have to worry too much about shake. You've decided that you're gonna use a gimbal. That's great. So question number two is, have you read and watched tutorials about it? Now this seems pretty straightforward again, but I know when I first got my gimbal, I just jumped in and said, I'm just gonna start using it because I'm so excited. And so I started using it on a short film I was working on and quickly learned I had no idea what I was doing with it, and it set everything back. I had all these people there and I was like, I need to learn how to balance this thing. I haven't taken time. I just thought it was gonna be really easy. It's not to say that this is hard to learn at all. It's pretty straightforward and you can get to learn it really quickly, but you should spend some time reading manuals, learning how things work, because otherwise you can actually do a lot of damage to your camera, your lenses, especially because you're dealing with movement and metal parts and mechanics, and if things go wrong, they can go wrong very badly and you can end up hurting a lot of things with your camera or yourself because you are taking this around. So watch tutorials, not just this one. This is very general and broad. Read your manual, be a good person. And lastly, the third question you should ask yourself is, or I guess the third thing you should acknowledge before you start using a gimbal is what you are wearing. So obviously dress according to whatever set you're on. I'm outside today, but regardless of where you are, when you're operating a gimbal, I think it's really good advice to be wearing generally loose-fitting clothing that allows you, maximum range of motion, and shoes. You should wear great shoes. What is the point of using a gimbal if you're just going to be stumbling around barefoot and the motion's going to be there anyway? Wear good shoes, quiet shoes, especially if you're trying to get sound in the space that you're in. You don't want to be like, I don't know, walking around in flip-flops. I would just be really annoying. I try to wear nice closed-toed shoes, athletic shoes, shoes that you can get good movement in, but also can absorb some impact, so have a little bit of cushion in them that also just help with movement. So now I'm going to get into the 5 tips for actually using a gimbal itself, or why you're actually using it. Number 1, you have now read the manual and you know how to use this. But even when you're still first using it, I think a general first step is understand your environment and your relationship to the gimbal, because it is, for lack of a better sense, an extension of you as a camera person. So, if you're moving around, flailing around wildly, the gimbal is also going to be flailing around wildly, trying to minimize all movement. So when you're first looking at it, take a look and literally observe the mechanics of what is going on. If you're supposed to do this tricky move, watch the gears while you practice it and see their limits, because you don't want to, you can push the limits. This isn't going to be like, oh, you can just throw this around in the air and it's going to be super smooth and nothing's going to happen. No, parts can clash up against each other. So really watch the way it works, and it'll actually give you a much better idea of how you can control it while you're using it. Number 2 is watch where you're going. When you're actually moving this thing around, you can kind of get trapped looking at the sensor of your camera being like, oh, is this a cool shot? And then you'll run into a tree. I've done that before, and it hurts your head and it can hurt your camera, and so that's bad. So definitely look where you're going while you're using it. Understand what's happening on your sensor. You want to practice things and frame things so they look good, but just watch where you're going so you don't run into trees. Number 3 is to know your path. In addition to watching where you're going, it also helps a whole lot if you know where you're going. So generally, if there's a scene with people involved, you should block it out beforehand so you know, hey, I need to move from here to here, know your marks, but just practice the path so you actually know what you're doing. Number 4, let's say you can't see where you're going and you don't know your path exactly, this might be improv, is to have help if possible. I've done this for other people have done this for me. If you're tracking backwards or running through a place really quickly, have somebody going with you with their hand on your shoulder or grabbing onto you to make sure that you don't hit anything and they can actually make the path for you. And that can be tremendously helpful. Even if you're on a set where you're the only one doing things, if there's a really hard shot you want to get, don't just try to go do it on your own because you might stumble and trip over and look stupid anyway. When you could have just had someone come. It's not that big of a deal. Last tip, number 5, is not to force movement with this. Even though a gimbal is awesome and it's giving you all this smooth motion, you feel like you can conquer the world with it, you can go high, you can go low, you can do all kinds of cool stuff. Don't force it, don't push it too far. So if for some reason you're panning back and forth, let's say, and it's not panning as far right as you want, and you keep, using your little trigger here, don't actually reach and try to like pull the camera side to side. I used to do that where I was like, I don't know, I wanted to tilt a little higher and it just wasn't going, and so I would like try to force it up and then it would spaz out on me and I was like, oh, that was so stupid. So don't do that. Don't force movement. Instead, when you need to, practice your movement as many times as possible and change the way you're thinking about it. A gimbal has a lot of moving parts, but so do you. So if you can actually practice the way you're moving, and maybe it's you that needs to move differently while you're doing it, not the gimbal itself, or you need to hold it out further in front of you or closer to you. There's a lot of focus on how the gimbal's working, but additionally, you need to know how your limbs work. And a lot can change if you just hold the gimbal out here versus hold it close to you, up high, down low. So understand your own body, and you can use that so you never have to really force movement, because you can move a whole lot too. Well, I hope those tips were helpful for you. I know those are things that I wish I had spent more time working on, but I learned them over the time of using this gimbal, and you never stop learning with a gimbal, I don't think. I still find things that are quirky. You run into the same things over and over again, and you just slowly get better and better at them over time. So never give up on your gimbal. Make sure you're using it for the right reasons, and I hope you found this helpful. I'll see you guys again soon. Peace.